Good evening, everyone. My name is Maya Locker, and I'm the Programs and Events Coordinator here at the museum at Eldridge Street. Thank you all so much for joining us for this virtual curator talk about our current exhibition from the Oregon Jewish Museum and Center for Holocaust Education in Portland, Oregon, Upon Thy Gates, the Elaine K. and Norman Winik Mezuzah collection. We will have a Q&A at the end, so please hold all questions until then, where you will be able to either type them in the chat or unmute yourself and ask on your own. I have turned on live captioning for accessibility, which is powered by artificial intelligence, so please forgive any typos, mistakes, errors that you may see there. Kenny, if you can advance to the next slide, please. Before we begin, I'd like to mention some exciting upcoming events that we have going on at the museum at Eldridge Street. For those of you who are new to us and to our programming, the museum at Eldridge Street is housed in the historic Eldridge Street Synagogue. Built in 1887, it was the first grand synagogue built by Eastern European Jews in the US and in North America. And this grand building was nearly lost to neglect in the mid-20th century before the museum's massive restoration project returned the space to its former glory and for public use. If you can go, actually this slide is perfect. I would like to highlight our upcoming programming for a moment. We offer both in-person and virtual programming. Some of our upcoming in-person programming includes a March 30th program, which begins at 6:30. And we are excited to host three esteemed colleagues and authors, Rebecca Faulkner, Hannah Griff-Slevin, and Amy Stein-Milford at the museum, who will be reading from their recent works. Please join us for a reception, followed by a reading and a discussion. I'd also like to highlight a wonderful program that we're having on May 2nd at 6 p.m. about June Hirsch's new book, Iconic Jewish Food. We are thrilled to have June along with Nikki Russ-Fetterman of Russ and Daughters and Roseanne Gold with us for a panel discussion about the New York City food scene, both past, present, and future. And there might even be some treats at the end in a very fun reception, so please join us for that. If you can go to the next slide, Kenny, I'd also like to talk about our very last program that's in conjunction with this exhibition, Upon Thy Gates, which will be taking place on April 20th at 6 p.m. at the museum. We're having a panel discussion with some incredible scholars of Chinese and Jewish studies who will be discussing both Jewish and Chinese cultural traditions that have come to represent safety and protection, which of course is related to the mezuzah that this whole exhibition is about. They will be bringing some incredible items to show you, so it's definitely not to be missed. And I'll be sending out information about that program very soon to all of you. You can read about and register for all of our programming on our website at eldridgestreet.org/events. But if you can advance to the next slide, Kenny, whether it's for a program or not, we'd love to welcome you to the museum at Eldridge Street. We are located at 12 Eldridge Street in Manhattan's Chinatown and are open every day except on Saturday from 10 to 5. And I'd now like to introduce our speaker this evening, Kenneth Helphand. Professor Helphand is a Philip H. Knight Professor of Landscape Architecture Emeritus at the University of Oregon, where he has taught courses in landscape history, theory, and design since 1974. He is a graduate of Brandeis University and Harvard's Graduate School of Design. He is the recipient of Distinguished Teaching Awards from the University of Oregon and the Council of Educators in Landscape Architecture. He's also the author of multiple award-winning books on landscape architecture and design. Helphand serves as editor of Landscape Journal, is a fellow of the American Society of Landscape Architects and CELA, honorary member of the Israel Association of Landscape Architects, a recipient of the Bradford Williams Medal, a Graham Foundation grantee, a board member of the Foundation for Landscape Studies, and former chair of the Senior Fellows in Garden and Landscape Studies at Dumbarton Oaks, Washington, D.C. He serves at the Oregon Jewish Museum and Center for Holocaust Education as a guest curator for Upon Thy Gates. And with that, I will turn the screen over to Kenny. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Eldridge Street, for this opportunity to talk about Upon Thy Gates, the Elaine and Norman Winik Mezuzah collection from the Oregon Jewish Museum and Center for Holocaust Education. I was the curator of the exhibit, and based on its success in Portland, Oregon, it was redesigned to travel, hence its location on the Lower East Side. It's in the gallery space that is below the sanctuary you just saw that magnificent picture of. If you entered Elaine and Norman's Winik apartment in Florida, you have been immediately confronted by a wall of 167 mezuzahs from all over the world, a collection based on their travels and Elaine's lifetime working in the Jewish community, including being the first woman to head the UJA in New York City. Full disclosure, Elaine Winik was my mother-in-law. She passed away 6 years ago, Norman a few years before that. She bequeathed her collection to Oregon Jewish Museum in Portland. There they are on a visit to Jerusalem. Let me ask the audience, who has a mezuzah? Raise your hands. I can't see everyone, of course, but I assume it's almost universal for Jews. Who had a mezuzah made by a family member? Do you know the translation of mezuzah into English? The translation is doorpost, and the source is clear. It's in the Shema, the basic prayer in Judaism that people say daily, many times a day. But at the end of the Shema, it says, inscribe them on the doorposts of your house and upon thy gates. Al mezuzot beitecha uvisharecha. It's from the daily prayer in the Shema. The story itself is in the Torah. Excuse me. It's in the Torah and is amongst the most ancient of prayers and commandments from at least 2,500 years ago. In fact, Josephus, in his book Antiquities of the Jews in the 1st century, already described hanging a mezuzah as an ancient practice. The mezuzah is the parchment where these words are described. It is known as a cloth, and you're looking at an image of that. Writing a cloth, a scribe has the same rule as writing a Torah scroll. It must be written on a parchment, and it must be perfect. At least that's the kosher version. Of course, in fact, you could now, if you like, unload a cloth. What you see in the exhibit, in fact, is not the mezuzah, but mezuzah cases, the structure that contains the cloth. Like all of us, I'll call the mezuzah case the mezuzah. Mezuzahs, I'll use the English plural, not the Hebrew plural of mezuzot. The use of the mezuzah case begins probably in the Middle Ages. Before that, the practice would be on the doorpost for the cloth, and that too was an ancient practice. There were holes bored into the walls, for example, of the Qumran caves, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, where a parchment would have been placed. These last two images you've seen are from doorways in Israel. The one on the left shows pictures, in fact, of the 7 species: wheat, barley, grapes, figs, pomegranates, olives, dates, that the Torah lists as the agricultural products of the land of Israel. Having a mezuzah is the sign of a Jewish household, one that announces to the outside world that this is a dwelling or a workplace of Jews. It's also been seen as an offering, a symbolic protection for the dwelling and its inhabitants. We Jews have rules for almost everything, but the only rule, in fact, is the placement on the doorpost. All else is custom. Ashkenazi Jews place them on a slant. Sephardic Jews sometimes place them horizontally or vertically. The rules. There are no rules. They can be made of any material and be of any size, although most of the modest size to fit on a doorpost. The mezuzah is typically placed at the entrance of the house, but can also be put in a room, any room except the bathroom. Many Jews, in fact, touch or kiss a mezuzah upon entering a house. Orthodox Jews will inspect the mezuzah every 7 years to check the condition of the cloth. The custom is that you take the mezuzah with you if you move, but if the next occupants are members of the Jewish community, it should remain. Typically, the mezuzah is screwed to a wall, but it can be fixed in any manner, as you see here, even duct tape when it's necessary. As I said, a mezuzah marks a Jewish household. Recently, the first gentleman, Doug Imhoff, affixed the mezuzah to the doorpost of the vice president's residence. Perhaps one day it'll happen at the White House. As I'll show you, the collection here has mezuzahs from all over the world, wherever Jews have lived. Note the list of countries here, and this is but a sample of the list. This is but a page, in fact, from the booklet I did about the collection, which in fact you can purchase at the museum. For example, you look at the different countries here, you see mezuzahs, silver mezuzah from Italy, another silver one from Iran, one from late 19th century from in brass from India. By profession, I'm a landscape architect and a landscape historian. I have a knowledge of Judaica. I've lived and been a visiting professor in Israel since 1980. In fact, I wrote a book called Dreaming Gardens, Landscape Architecture and the Making of Modern Israel. But I have my day job at the University of Oregon. I'm now retired, sort of. So how to research these mezuzahs? Of course, I began on Google. And if you Google the word mezuzah, thousands, literally thousands of images popped up. And I, in fact, looked at thousands. This is a picture of a shop selling mezuzahs in Israel. This is another shop in Israel, again showing mezuzahs. And this is but a very, very small sample of the possibilities. I looked at the websites of Jewish museums worldwide, at Judaica auctions. I visited the only other large collection at the Great Synagogue in Jerusalem. This collection, assembled by Bell Rosenblatt, is mostly of the work of contemporary artists. Well, there is a literature and rules on the proper display of the mezuzah and its folklore. There's in fact almost nothing on the artistry and the design of the mezuzah case. This exhibit originated at the Orange Jewish Museum and Center for Holocaust Education in Portland. You're looking here at Alicia, one of our archivists, working on the collection and preparing it for display. The first display as a traveling exhibit has been wonderfully at the museum at Eldridge Street on New York's Lower East Side. When the show finishes, it will travel to the Jewish Museum, Miami. For most, but not all, I was able to find the name of the artist who created an individual mezuzah, especially if it was a modern mezuzah, its country of origin, when it dated from approximately, and there are in fact mezuzahs in the collection that go back to the early 19th century. I also could determine the material that it was made from. On the captions you'll see in the presentation have many or most of those facts. So materials. The cases can be made from almost anything, obviously except pigskin, I think. All metals, silver, brass, copper, bronze, sheet metal, even shell casings, and metal that's been shaped, beaten, and extruded. And they're made from glass and ceramics and all methods of those: blown glass, porcelain, fired clay, even concrete, and jewels often added. Each of these mezuzahs has a story. The one on the right, for example, is from the Posen firm in Frankfurt, begun by Brendina Posen, the widow of the silversmith Lazarus Posen. By the late 19th century, that company, in fact, had become the largest supplier of Judaica in Europe, as well as for the Christian community as well. The firm continued until the Nazis came to power. Two other ceramic examples, Jenya Berger here, a modern Israeli one, and the one on the right by my son Ben for his grandmother. There were mezuzahs made of wood, made of carved wood and carved ivory that you see here. And on the left is a paper cut by Judith Henkin, in fact, a resident of Eugene, Oregon, and a friend of ours, in the shape of a Bedouin dress. The one on the right by Leona Fine is a, if I pronounce it right, potichomania that uses reproductions of old documents in the creation of a mezuzah. In all of these materials, there's a display of skill and artistry, extraordinary displays in the shaping, in the form, in the pattern, in the scales of what in fact are small works of art. Any subject and any style is okay. So you have diverse styles in the collection, from Baroque opulence to modernism to kitschy renditions. Much like synagogue architecture that derives its character from the cultures from where Jews have lived, so too mezuzahs. It's not surprising that most contemporary mezuzahs have a modern look, just like most contemporary synagogue design. Anything goes. There are female mezuzahs. Yes, you can get a Superman mezuzah. Well, after all, Superman was conceived by two Jewish artists. But of course, the most common symbols relate to Judaica. You have here a shin on top, on the opposite. The shin and then the cloth is displayed here in the window in these various tubes. And the glass tubes or glass or plastic tubes are often used to display the cloth and a presentation to the community. A few others these of different styles, and the dramatic shin, the shaddai, which I'll talk about in a minute, these made of brass, silver, and other examples. Or here one by Frank Meisler, display through the window, and another by J Dash, where the entire tube, here you see here on the right, Janet Dash, in fact, where the entire cloth is wrapped up like a Torah scroll. What I found most interesting is the iconography, the language of Jewish symbols found in the mezuzahs, the collective story and message that they're imparting with multiple layers of meaning and significance. Another page from that booklet. So I want us to look at those various symbols and iconography. Foremost is the shin, standing for Shaddai, one of the names of God. Most mezuzahs have a shin, and it's customary to have the shin or shaddai, even much of the cloth, visible. This is by Eligera. Note the tube on the left. It's a little hard to see, and you see the cloth sticking out from that. Here, the entire mezuzah has a shin on top, and in fact, the entire mezuzah is then a sculpted brass shin. There are numerous examples, again, in all styles, in all materials. Jewish mystics see the three prongs of a shin as representing this tree of life, and that the left and right are extremes, and that the middle suggests a balance in one's life. Here you see clay vessels, the one on the left, the clay vessel, the one on the right with a clay vessel, a ceramic vessel, the one by Lorna Sokolovsky, which has a talus draped over, in fact, these walls that you see there. If not a shin, then a shaddai. Fran Alexander's example here on the left, one from Yemen on the right. This beautiful, beautiful example of an early 20th century wooden mezuzah from Poland has a small window that you see there, so you can see the shaddai and you can see the echo of the text of the cloth in the middle. Shaddai also stands for Shomer Daltot Yisrael, meaning the guardians of the door of Israel. This too sometimes will be written on the mezuzah. I found it fascinating to see the varieties of typography of how the letter shin is presented. As you see here, this just a small sample. It'll be virtually different on every single mezuzah. Kind of like a graphic penmanship. A few more examples of those. You have to recognize that these are tiny. These are, quarter-inch things or an inch long. And you have to look closely to see the detail of these. Okay. The next symbol, the Mogen David, of course, is the six-pointed star. It's an ancient symbol, in fact, of interlocking triangles. The symbol is, in fact, found in many cultures, both in the East and the West. But in the last 2 centuries, it became identified as the primary symbol of Judaism. The Nazis maliciously appropriated it as a yellow star, but Israel adopted the Mogen David as the center of its flag. This example is from India, where the tube is being supported by these 2 Mogen Davids. These 2 early Israelis examples here, both in wood and in silver. The one on the right from the Bezalel school, which I'll speak of shortly, and just note the artistry and the craftsmanship and the workmanship that goes into these. 2 modern examples here by Adi Diamant and Gary Rosenthal, and in a kind of much more contemporary vernacular. Often, the mezuzah is crowned. A crown connotates power, nobility, authority. Torah scrolls are crowned, signifying God as the sovereign. This gorgeous 19th century example is from Galicia in Poland, where the mezuzah itself seems crowned with peacocks, in fact, supporting the crown. And note the shaddai again in that little aperture in the window. Or this very simple ceramic example on the left, or this elaborate European silver one and a beautiful, tiny, small crown atop it. Just note the detail that's there. Often, these miniature structures are supported by a column, like you see here on this ark, and note the crown above as well. More about arks in a moment. Here, there are 2 spiraling columns that recall those of Solomon's temple, which were named Boaz and Yachin. And you see these columns as part of many mezuzahs, as shown in arcs that I'll speak of shortly. Or this very bold modern abstraction where the entire text is visible and supported by these 2 columns of fused glass. This is a personal favorite, and I've yet to find out who the artist was, so if anyone knows, I'd love to find out. You not surprisingly see tablets that obviously refer to the tablets of the 10 Commandments that Moses brought down from Mount Sinai. On the left, there are a series of 2 stained glass tablets and this tube with the cloth cutting across those. On the right, the case incorporates a painting by Marc Chagall of receiving the tablets. The pair of tablets you'll see are often used as doors that reveal a text or an inside image that we'll soon look at. The mezuzah itself is seen as being protected, a protection, but the mezuzah itself is sometimes protected by lions, as you see in this 19th century German example. The lions, of course, are the lions of the tribe of Judah. They represent strength and ferocity, and are protecting and guarding the mezuzah itself. The lion is also the symbol of the city of Jerusalem. In another example by Frank Meisner, a lion guards the doorway to a castle, and when the door opens, a cloth is revealed, and the word Shomer Daltot Israel in the middle of the door is displayed as well. Meisner, in fact, was born in Danzig, educated in England in architecture at Manchester University. His home and studio were in the artist quarter of the old city of Jaffa. Not surprisingly, there are mezuzahs in the shape of Torahs or miniature Torahs or having images of Torahs complete with towns and Torah shields. In this case, it is created of repoussé silver. Repoussé silver is where a raised or relief design is hammered in from the backside of a piece. Again, here note the crown and note the window for a Shaddai. By now, it should be clear that there are many images that could be combined in a single work. Just look at this one. At the top, it is adorned with a crown. Below it are the tablets of the 10 Commandments. There's a Torah shield with a shin on top of that. It is flanked by lions, flanked by lions and a Mogen David. A shin is on a Torah shield, and above all of it is above a Torah case. There's also a floral imagery on the base, leading to the next fact, that nature and naturalistic imagery is commonplace, rendered both realistically and in abstract forms. Thus, you see tendrils surrounding cases. There's trees and vines, fruit and flower, and all are some of the 7 species of the land of Israel that I noted earlier: wheat, barley, grapes, figs, pomegranates, olive, dates. And there are animals, doves, birds, eagles that have allusions to biblical, regional, and national imagery. In this little detail just below the crown, there's a dove, the symbol of the peace, carved into this mezuzah by Daniel Kafri. And here you see a mezuzah as a fish growing out of a tree. In fact, this one is too large to be in the exhibits. It's almost a foot tall. I have no idea where the cloth was placed in this, but you see birds and flowers surrounding this rather fanciful example. And not surprisingly, there are trees of life, the Eitz Chaim. And like beautiful imagery, they also address the ideal of the Garden of Eden, the first home of humankind. The reference is also to the Torah, for as it says in the liturgy, a tree of fast to those who hold fast to it. For Kabbalists, it holds mystical layers of meaning. The one on the right that you see there is a vine of peace with shalom instead of Shaddai as a text, and what looks almost like a tree house in the tree. Miniature arcs are often present. There is an actual arc that you see from Hitler here on the right. It's not the one, the mezuzah you see is not based on that actual arc, but it's based on similar places. Like actual arcs, they contain multiple symbolic references. They're miniature architectural models of arcs that contain the Torahs, complete with the parochet, the curtain covering the ark, a ner tamid, the eternal light, doors like tablets that open, columns flanking the ark, a shin or a shaddai, and rich naturalistic ornamentation. Many have doors that open, revealing the cloth or a scene. Of course, you can't see this in the exhibit because can't allow people to go and open these, but fortunately the photographs allow that. Herman Brzezinski's tablet doors open to reveal a bird of peace on a branch. There's a shaddai through a window. All of it is in fact supported by a pair of lions. Brzezinski was born in 1912, only began carving at the age 70 and lived another 17 years. Some of you know the artist Arthur Shore because he was the illustrator for Abraham Joshua Heschel's book on the Sabbath, also for a series of Agadas that he did. The mezuzah, this mezuzah that he created, is incredibly rich in its symbolism. If you look closely, there's a shin on top, columns of fish on the sides, topped by pomegranates, echoing the rimonim that covered the supports of the Torah. The entire ark is supported by a tree or vegetation from below. The doors here that open show musicians, figures, in fact, with candles. You look at this in detail, we'll show the shin above, that you see there. The columns topped here, one column topped with a crown, one in the shape of a pomegranate, the other in the shape of a pomegranate, and in its detail, the blessing of the Kohanim on that. And below, a tree, again, supporting the entire thing, and above dates in Hebrew of 5695 and 5716 from the Hebrew calendar, equaling 1934 and 1955. And I've yet to figure out, and I've asked others about the meaning of those dates. When you open the doors of this mezuzah, which are the 10 Commandments, on the inside of the doors are revealed, and then inside there's a wedding scene in detail. If you look closely, there's a chuppah on the left being held out. This English example shows the tablets of the 10 Commandments, lions above, and the stained glass windows of a sanctuary. I've tried to look virtually at every synagogue in England to see if it's based on a particular example. And in this repose brass example, the ark is flanked by Moses on the one side, holding the tablets, and Aaron on the other side as the high priest. And here's a doorway supported by Shomer Daltot Yisrael, opens to reveal Shema Yisrael, and a window into the cloth, and a Mogen David on the keystone of the arch that's above. And also below that, even again, vegetation and symbols of pomegranates. Not surprisingly, you see images of the landscape of Israel, and especially of Jerusalem and its sacred sites, noted in painterly or in abstract fashion. There are the blocks of the walls of the Kotel, the wall in Jerusalem, of Solomon's temple, of Rachel's tomb, scenes of agriculture, Jerusalem's iconic sites, and the characteristic vegetation of Israel, of trees, palms, olives, and cypresses. Okay. Here you see a painting by Shlomo of Sfat, and another painting here on wood where, in fact, the building there looks more like a Swiss cottage to me. Or two ceramic examples here, which show Rachel's tomb and Jerusalem behind the walls. In this wooden example from the Bezalel school of a century ago, there are in detail scenes of Jerusalem and a text noting the Kotel Ma'ariv, the Western Wall, and also the tomb of Rachel on the bottom, as well as a flower at the center. Another example from here of a Bezalel mezuzah, again from a century ago, with inlaid examples of scenes of Jerusalem. The Bezalel was and is Israel's premier school of art and design. It was founded by Boris Schatz in 1906. Its goal was to create a new style combining Jewish, Middle Eastern, and biblical imagery rooted in the character and materials of the Israeli landscape. The school offered and still offers courses in painting and sculpture, the crafts of metal, wood, ceramics, now architecture as well. The school was named for Bezalel, the first artist named in the Torah who created the ark. More about him soon. There are even maps, a miniature choreography. This by Michael Ende was created for Israel's 40th anniversary in 1988, and is built around a map of Israel and an image of Jacob's dream. If you note the details of the map, the dream of Jacob ascending to a ladder to heaven and wrestling with an angel, and the text on the side that holds the cloth and says, "The land you are resting upon, I shall give it to you and your descendants." You look at it in detail, you see Jacob sleeping there. It's kind of beautiful carved image, a tiny image of his wrestling the angel, and atop it all, again, a shin with a Mogen David inside. The mezuzah, in fact, marks the entrance to a building. So it's no surprise that architectural imagery is employed that shows entire structures, architectural details and elements of columns, capitals, doorways, domes, towers, windows. There are images, and we've seen some already, of fortresses, of famous synagogues, all characteristically in the style of the country of origin. This small ceramic example of the Anne Frank house and what the actual house looks like in Amsterdam. Maud Weiser and Toby Schuster have done, in fact, mezuzahs of many places. Here's of a synagogue in Krakow, Poland, and the synagogue, as you see, in fact, still stands. Another they did here of a building in the German colony in Jerusalem. There are architectural elements of towers, columns, and capitals. And on the one on the right, a roof line looks almost like a cuckoo clock. As we've seen, there are multiple combinations of these images and materials and telling different stories. And in many of these, there is an amazing artistry. And you have to look closely at techniques, like, for example, of this one in India. Most dramatic is the artistry and skill and of the filigree of Yemenite silversmiths. Techniques here, another silver example, many adorned, as we'll see, with precious stones and jewels. Metalsmithing was an occupation like a tailor that could be practiced anywhere, particularly in places where Jews were forbidden to have certain occupations. These were occupations that they could take with them, and they provided these services to both Jews and non-Jews alike. Most of the Jewish Yemenite community was airlifted to Israel in Operation Magic Carpet in 1949 and 50, had a tremendous influence on the art and craft in Israel, now practiced by both Yemenites and others as well. The Yemenites also made mezuzahs that were worn as amulets. These were worn around the neck. A bride would receive one as part of dowry and wear it on her wedding day to ward off evil spirits. And the little hoops you see on the right, on these, originally held Jews or bells dangling from them, often, again, in the shape of pomegranates. All of these, a few other examples of these, as you see vegetation, tendrils winding around these as if they're trees and columns. All of these mezuzahs are, of course, important, especially to the households that they were part of. Many are one of a kind. Some you could purchase, but some are particularly special. This one is from Morocco and has the name of its owner, Esther Lakovi, below the Shaddai. The cloth would be placed behind the metalwork, and this is about a foot tall, in fact, the original. This would be placed over a colorful textile and placed inside of the home, probably for security purposes. And this one was probably made in the ancient medieval city of Fez. The most important and the most poignant mezuzah in the collection is this one, created in the Theresienstadt concentration camp. It is in fact signed on the back, Edith Simon, 1941. Elaine Winik and I as well looked for Edith Simon. So with 3 Edith Simons in the camp, none survived. The imagery is all of Jerusalem, a crown with figures like a women's gallery on the top, the women's gallery of an Orthodox temple. You see the Western Wall, and you see a huge flower growing out of a wall. In a more celebratory vein, Shirley Kagan replicated the mezuzah that was and the form of an ancient amphora that was taken by Jeff Hoffman into space. He was the first male Jewish astronaut in 1985. And there were also baby mezuzahs. One of these was Norman Winik's. Both of these are from the 1920s. And it's about an inch tall. And there were mezuzahs worn around the neck. I know I wore one for a while as a child. At another milestone in the life cycle, there are wedding mezuzahs, most often depicting a couple, as you might expect, often given as a gift. 2 final examples. The first from Ethiopia. You should know this story, how in 1984, in a covert operation, thousands of members of the Ethiopian Jewish community were airlifted to Israel. In fact, I was working in Israel that day. In this mezuzah, there were embroideries incorporated into the mezuzah case. I'll conclude with another mezuzah created at the Bezalel, the art school in Jerusalem, and we use this on the poster for the exhibit. The Hebrew text on the mezuzah says, "And you shall write them on the doorposts of your house and upon your gates." Again, the words from the cloth and the words from the Shema. The school was named for Bezalel, as I mentioned earlier, the first artist named in the Torah who created the ark. And he was chosen because, and it's written in the Torah as follows, "I have filled him with the Spirit of God, in wisdom, in understanding, and knowledge, and in all manner of workmanship." This list of qualities, spirit, wisdom, understanding, knowledge, and skill, I often quoted to my students as qualities that they should aspire to as design professionals, and I think are embodied in this remarkable miniature works of art. Thank you, and I'll gladly take any questions.
Thank you so much, Kenny. And again, this exhibition at the museum at Eldridge Street closes on the 23rd of April, so please come see it while you can. We're going to open it up to questions now. I'll start either reading from the chat or taking some questions out loud. Folks are welcome to unmute themselves. We do have some questions in the chat, and maybe the family can answer this as well. But we have a question about what Elaine and Norman's favorites were. Maybe they were the same, maybe they were different.
I know.
What were they?
I do know the answer to that, and so on. There were two. One is the one from Theresienstadt, most dramatically. And in fact, these acquired in a variety of ways. And some of these were given as gifts from Norman to Elaine that he purchased at Judaica auctions and kept good track of those. And there is another one, which is a wooden one, which she was given by a rabbi shortly after the war, the Israeli war at the Lebanese border. And both of those were ones that had particular meaning for her. And then honestly, those that were, and then not all, made by her children or grandchildren or presents from friends and family members. Yeah.
Amazing. And we do have a few questions in the chat, but let's go to
Sure.
Suzanne Zipper, who had her hand raised first.
Thank you very much. I was just wondering about how you were able to obtain the mezuzah from the artist who did it in the concentration camp. Is there a story behind that?
I believe Norman got that at a Judaica auction.
So you don't know how they got it?
And actually, I had the idea of, because it is signed. So I looked up if this individual, there's a list of all the individuals who were interred or were prisoners in Theresienstadt and what their fate was. There were 3 people with that same name, Edith Simon. They were all exterminated. And I was actually hoping perhaps I could find, someone who was one of their descendants, but that was not possible.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thank you. Let's do one more in the
And
chat.
I should just add, wait a minute. The only reason Theresienstadt was the Nazis saw Theresienstadt as a show place. And in fact, the International Red Cross visited the camp to show the Nazis, so the Nazis could delude people that people were being treated well. So in fact, they did allow people to do crafts and art and other activities, at least until the Red Cross left, and then they were sent to their death.
We have a question about the checking a mezuzah after 7 years and where that tradition comes from.
It's within the Orthodox community. I mean, there are so many things in Judaism that are custom, and depending on which part of the Orthodox or ultra-Orthodox community are, every 7 years, which is a Sabbath year, you should check it, and that means taking the cloth out and particularly seeing its condition, whether any it'd been harmed or bugs got in there or it got dirty or whatever, and then you put it back. Then you put it back in, and in addition, as I mentioned earlier, to be completely kosher, the cloth itself needs to be written on a parchment like the Torah, done by a sofer, done by a scribe, and done also perfectly with no errors. But it's a lot shorter to write that without errors than writing an entire Torah.
And I think before we get to our other friends who have their hands raised, Susan Shapiro in the chat had a great point where she asks if the Yemenites had the tradition of wearing a mezuzah around their neck because they were often a nomadic community.
No, the Yemenites weren't particularly nomadic. They were kind of semi-nomadic. They were seasonally nomadic. I think it is more the tradition in a good part of the Middle Eastern world, both the Jewish and Druze and Arabic world, of wearing your wealth. Of you wear gold bracelets and necklaces, and you carry your wealth with you, and not put it under the mattress or in a bank or something like that. And it also is a display of the artistry of the community.
Amazing. And let's go to Fran. You have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Kenny is a fellow Brandesian. I was the class of 1961, and I wanted to thank you personally for a marvelous presentation, and I have a sense of pride. I did want to note that it's interesting to note that in the 40s and 50s, immigrant Jews were not, and certainly my family, who were both teachers, were not eager to post their Judaism on their doorposts. And in fact, I was not permitted to wear any indication of the fact that I was Jewish as I went to public school. But of course, now I feel liberated despite what's going on, and I'm very proud to have on my doorpost a mezuzah, and my grandchildren feel the same. And now I'm excited to come to Eldridge, as I have in the past, and see the exhibit and perhaps purchase from the Jewish Museum new mezuzah. And I thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, I'm the class of '68. You know, you were there in Brandeis, what we refer to as the good old days.
We were. I was.
Well, when you go to the museum, you can also purchase a little booklet I did about.
And I want that. I want that.
I think, and not just I think from your experience in the United States, I think throughout the world, wherever Jews lived, there was always the question of how visible to be in the community. And If you live within, clearly, let's say within a ghetto, you were within a Jewish community. If you lived within a place where Jews were more marginalized, then I think, demonstrating or showing your face, whether it's a mezuzah or wearing a kippah or not working during the holidays, whatever it might be, that would always be kind of more moot and difficult. And I'm pleased that you're seeing kind of more and more demonstrations of faith and being part of the larger Jewish community.
And despite the fact that the Bronx was indeed a ghetto of its kind, one really was not eager to advertise one's religion at that time. We had enough problems. My father taught at City College, and we had the FBI coming during the
I spent half my.
You can imagine what I've lived through.
I spent half my childhood at my grandfather's house in the Bronx. I think there were enough Jews in the Bronx. You could have had mezuzahs on the bridges as you go into the Bronx. By the way, in terms of where, I should note, and I think many of you have been to Israel. If you go to Israel, there's a mezuzah on every door in the country. I mean, I teach at the Technion, every single door, except the bathrooms, has a mezuzah. Every single one.
Before we get to Faye, in the chat, we have a few people asking about comparable collections, which there really are the one in Jerusalem, which you briefly mentioned in your presentation. You told me really interesting facts about that collection in Jerusalem on the phone. Do you want to tell everyone else?
Sure. That is, by the way, I've looked at least as possible, at every Jewish museum in the world, all of which have material. If you go to a Jewish museum, for example, go to the magnificent Jewish Museum, a few miles north in Manhattan. You go to the Jewish Museum, there's wonderful exhibits of Judaica. There's whole walls of menorahs, of Chanukiot, and then there's a few mezuzahs. That's very commonplace in collections of Judaica. There'll be a few mezuzahs, and the rest, even if they have them, are packed away in the archive and less out in public. And as I've said, virtually, exception of one article, I found any scholarship by art historians, for example, about the cases in any language. Okay, so there's a lot of digging. So the story. I did go to the Great Synagogue in Jerusalem, and I met with the person who's in charge of the synagogue, not the rabbi, but the person who essentially runs the place. If you go there, there's over 700 mezuzahs on these cases, which are not greatly designed, but you can look at them all. And each case has a label and then numbers. So it'll be case Aleph and number 12. And I went to him and I said, well, I'd like to see the manual, which tells me what everything is, because there was some that are in the Winik collection, and there's others that I hadn't been able to identify. And he said, well, the woman who did this collection, she came, she documented all this, and she was actually a scholar of Judaica. went back to her home in Muncie, New York, and then sadly passed away. So all her notes went into a box and it stayed there. She died. The box came to the synagogue in Jerusalem and it's remained there. And he and I have had some discussions about, well, could I at least open the box and maybe, I've offered to kind of help, in fact, identify things that are not identified, that she was not able to identify. I did, frankly, just got to a point where I could tell what was made in Austria-Hungary versus was made in Poland, was made in Russia, what was Germany, and the distinctions between that. Yeah, thank you.
Easy. And a follow-up question to that is Fran Addison, who's of course one of the artists of one of the mezuzahs in your collection. She wants to know about where the Bell Rosenbaum collection is in Israel, because apparently they did purchase a few of her works. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, the Great Synagogue is on the edge of Independence Park in Jerusalem. And if you're in that park, you can't miss it. It's this kind of giant stone and concrete structure. It is open to the public. I mean, you can go there for services, but the lobby itself is open to the public for that exhibition space. Yeah,
it lives up to its name. You can't miss it.
Yeah, it's
let's
great.
go on to let's go on to Faye. You've been waiting.
I have I don't have a collection, but I do have sort of a collection because I have a mezuzah on every doorpost in my house. And I lived in Jerusalem, and many of them were purchased from different artists in Jerusalem. But my question is this. Every time a mezuzah was put up, my husband, who's no longer with me, but was more religious than I, insisted that it has to be put on a slant. Do you know anything about that, or why it had to be put on a slant?
Okay.
It's the way it's supposed to be.
If you spend any time, and I'm not a Talmudic scholar or a scholar of the Mishnah, but if you look at the Talmud, there's a page that has a text at the center, and then a comment by the first. There's commentary all around, essentially a debate about that question. You look at the kind of history of where the mezuzah is placed. It has to be on the doorpost. That's universal. Its position, whether it's slanted, whether it's flat, etc., is entirely custom. It's entirely custom, and generally in the Ashkenazi world, it has been presented as a slant. I've been to former Jewish communities in Eastern Europe, in Poland and the Czech Republic, in communities that were Jewish communities that were destroyed. And if you looked at old houses, you will see places where the mezuzah was inserted. You'll see, nail holes or screw holes on the doorposts, particularly in stone structures, of where the mezuzah was. But you get different opinions, but different. This rabbi said that rabbi said that.
Oh, I was given the thought that it must be placed that way, otherwise it's not holy or what have you. So in my house, if you walk in, they're all slanted in a certain way, but I was curious about that.
It should be, of course, upright. I mean, there's a shin, there's a letter. You don't put it upside down. It's not
No.
It's like horseshoes, where if you put it upside down, the luck is going to fall out.
Oh, Hasba Khalila, no. Thank you so much, and a wonderful, wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Frida.
I would like to, it was a lovely presentation. Thank you, Kenny. Really appreciated it.
Thank
and
you.
My family lives in Portland, Oregon.
Oh,
So I've told them. But I wanted to mention when I traveled in Italy, in certain towns where there were Jewish communities, on the side posts of the dwellings, you can still see grooves that were sort of dug out of the stone,
yes.
where a mezuzah was placed when the Jewish community was still alive. Yeah.
It's a sad marker, tragic marker.
Oh, absolutely. Heartbreaking.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I experienced that in Krakow as well when I visited. It is very heartbreaking. Barbara.
A couple things. One is, I heard that it's at an angle because some rabbis thought it should be vertical and some thought it should be horizontal, and ultimately it was decided to split the difference and make them go at an angle. So I don't know if that's.
I heard that story as well. Yes.
And along the same vein, Shulamit in the chat says that it's an indication of our own ability to compromise. So,
And then I met some young artists from Poland who were making new mezuzahs, but they were taking casts from those dug-in places where mezuzahs used to be. And then they were making mezuzahs.
I hadn't heard that. That's wonderful. That's
Yeah.
really very interesting. Yeah.
And then I was wondering if you have any favorite mezuzahs or stories about them being purchased in general, or, you know.
Well, that me or Elaine. I mean, I have ones that are me.
Okay.
Um,
Or them, like what were their favorites, what's yours? What do you have in your own home?
I don't know whether I can, I'm gonna try something. I'm walking over to, I was in the kitchen. Right? All right. See that, everybody?
That's
Okay,
beautiful.
this, isn't it gorgeous? Okay. This one is made by a woman named Annika Shmulevitz. Annika Shmulevitz teaches metalsmithing in Idaho. She grew up in Eugene. She's a friend, married to his best friend, who was the son of our rabbi. And Annika does spectacular work in metalsmithing, including in Judaica, and her work has been displayed at, in fact, Jewish museums around the country. That one of this kind of leaf, silver leaf, my wife saw it on her website and said, she wants to get that. She says, I'm going to get that. So she called Annika and said, I want that. And Annika said, I don't know. It's hard. I'm busy. I have other commissions. And my wife was a little pissed off that she was being put off. And then a few months later, it was actually a Passover. My kids were here. And in fact, they had bought it for us as a present without telling us. And Annika said to my son, like, your mom's really persistent. But so that is a favorite one, in fact. Yes, and it's gorgeous.
Yes.
And you can look up her work, her website. There, she does stunning work. Yeah.
Can you say her name again?
Smulevitz, S-M-U-L-I, however the rest of that. First name's Annika. Yeah.
let's do just one more, and then I think we have to say farewell. We have Artie Bennett, who says that he has a collection of mezuzahs from Israel from the 50s and 70s, and they all seem to be small and greenish copper. Do you have any knowledge about that era of mezuzahs from Israel?
Well, copper ages and turns green. That's what happens to copper. There's a reason that the Statue of Liberty is green, not the original copper. So that's what happens to them. I mean, the ones I think, again, for those some of these have some significant economic value.
I'm sorry. It's Leah Bennett, but using the husband's computer. These are like from the tourist places, and it was a very stylized with Israeli, imagery and some of the things that you talked about. And it was already greenish and goldish color, and they were like made by the thousands, and they were like in homes all over in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And they made Seder plates. They made all
I know
sorts of
exactly what you mean. Yes, exactly what you mean. No, there is, as I showed you a few pictures at the beginning of just kind of, like stores that sell Judaica, whether it's, mezuzahs. I have pictures of kippot, like hundreds of, kippahs of any design that you want. And that there is clearly a tourist market. And some of these in the show are certainly that, and things that are sold for tourists can be works of great artistry.
Amazing. Well, thank you all so much. I would like to remind all of you, if you haven't yet seen the exhibition and you are in the area or coming to the area, you have exactly 1 month to do so. We are closing the exhibition for it to move on to its next home on the 23rd of next month. So please come give it a look if you haven't already. As someone else mentioned, we do have a catalog that we do have for sale, so we would love to have more people check that out. Yeah, please check out our upcoming programming at the museum at Eldridge Street at eldridgestreet.org/events. As I said in the introduction, this is not published yet, but our very last program in conjunction with this exhibition will be on the 20th of next month. With some incredible scholars. I think Ken and Joanna are here tonight on Zoom, as well as folklorist Alana Harlow and our very own Regina Stein, our scholar in residence, and they will be speaking about both Chinese and Jewish traditions for protecting the home. And showing us some really spectacular show and tell objects as well. And that'll be in person in the museum's main sanctuary. That will be published hopefully either this week or beginning of next week. So I will be sending everyone who attended this program information about registering for that program. Kenny, anything you'd like to say before we say goodnight?
Two things. One, I just want to thank everybody for listening and hopefully enjoying this and hopefully learning something. And if people have any questions later, feel free to kind of contact me or email me or call me. Also, for those of you who are not in New York or not in Oregon, this is a traveling exhibit. And if you're from some community in other parts of the country or know people in other parts of the country that might be interested in this, you can contact me or contact the Oregon Jewish Museum in having this move to your community. The more people that see it, the better, you know. And my mother-in-law, Elaine, and her husband, Norman, are honored and gratified that this is happening. Yeah. So thank you all.
Thank you. It is wonderful to do this in their honor. And we want to wish you all a very good night. And thank you all so much for being with us and bearing with us tonight. Thank you. Bye-bye.